Jai Baba and welcome. My name is Jimmy Khan, in case some of you may not know. We have a friend from United States, but originally from India. I'll give you a brief about Nosherwan. We welcome Nosherwan and Maruk is Nosherwan's wife. And before I forget, today is Nosherwan's birthday. So we will sing his happy birthday after the aarti. Please remind me. A brief introduction on Nosherwan. Nosherwan was born in a Baba family at Dehradun. His parents were already Baba lovers. Nosherwan was two months old. He was an infant, 2 months old when I can't say that he met Baba, so I say Baba met him because he was 2 months old. And thereafter, a number of times at Dehradun itself. And then Nosherwan did his studies at the Dehradun school. He graduated, and then to look for a job, he came to Bombay in those days. And he worked for Times of India, he worked for Air India, he worked for Taj Hotels, etc. And then situation arose and they moved to United States, where he's been there with Maruk and their son Merab and Merab's family, etc. So they've been in the United States for the past 35 years. Nosherwan will tell us a brief about his being with Meher Baba, so I won't go into that details. But he has been fortunate enough, he has been lucky to be with Meher Baba any number of times one-on-one with only Meher Chankar as the interpreter. And as he uses the term, they were issue-based meetings. He will explain to us what these issue-based meetings are. And therefore, because they were issue-based meeting, Baba wanted to meet him one-on-one. Because this was not something for the group. And therefore, Baba met him. Baba called him, in fact, and met him one-on-one a number of times. Nosherwan has under his belt a number of publications, n number of publications. In fact, the two of them came out 2 months to June, right? June itself. He is the editor of Glow magazines. These are Glow magazines, and Glow magazines celebrated Golden Jubilee, 50 years of circulations, publications, and there was a grand classic function in New Jersey. And just give me a moment. This event was covered in This event was covered in the summer 16 edition, and the photographs on the left top is yours truly. The lady photographer was smart. I am the only one who showed horizontal. All the others are vertical.
Only others are horizontal. Oh, this one is only one vertical.
Sorry. And this is the third page. So it shows different speakers, different singers, Nosherwan, etc. etc. So these Glow magazines are given on sale at the Bombay Center. San Patel is the one who's in charge. He does their circulation, selling, etc. Now, there's one thing you need to know, that I'm not the only one who's going to ask questions to Nosh. It's an open forum, but to break the ice, I will start with a few questions. But in between, as I ask questions, in between you please ask questions also. Thursday is supposed to be an open forum. Thursday is supposed to be open forum, so everybody will ask questions. The very first and very best question is, how did your parents come in Baba's fold?
Jai Meher Baba.
Meher Baba.
Thank you, Jimmy, for wishing me a very happy birthday on my 70th. But what many of you may not know is that it's also the 70th anniversary of my meeting Meher Baba. As he mentioned, I met Meher Baba when I was 2 months old. But when people ask me, how did you come to Meher Baba? I always smile and tell them that I did not go to Meher Baba came to me. And the beginning, of course, it all started in the 1930s when my father, Kekobad Nalawala, or later on known as Keki Nalawala to all the rest of the world, because he was a very active Baba worker, Meher Baba worker. I had first heard of Meher Baba. A school teacher once gave him a little booklet called Sayings of Meher Baba, and he probably forgot about it and may have read a few lines in it and put it aside. It didn't make much of an impact at that time. It was printed out of London. But as the years went by, there was a traveling salesman whose name was, his name also was Keki, and his name was Keki Desai. And he used to travel from place to place. He used to work for Siba, and he would sell medicines to chemists. So he would stop by in Dehradun and talk about Meher Baba, and my father would listen to him, and so on and so forth. But the turning point came in his life when somehow Keki Desai had conveyed to people in Mehrabad, the Mandli in Mehrabad, that there was a Parsi in Dehradun. Now, what used to happen is that when Meher Baba had to go to a certain area to do must work or feeding the poor or distribution of food to the poor or any of the other work that he intended doing, particularly contacting the musts. They had a chart which they would fill up and send out to various different people in that area and get a feedback from them. Who are the musts in that area? Do they hold any religious melas or functions? Are there any mad, poor musts, mahatmas, yogis? So a questionnaire used to go out, and they would get in touch with people and contact them. In this case, my father was contacted to find out if there were musts in that area, and that was the first time in 1941 when Meher Baba came to Dehradun. But my father was unable to meet him despite his being very anxious to see him. Baba used to be in seclusion, or he didn't meet anyone except making contact with the musts. So then in 1942, Baba came again, and this time both Keki Desai and my father just saw Meher Baba. He came in the doorway, the curtain was open, Baba blessed them from a distance, and my father had his darshan for the very first time. And then, although he was married, but my mother never had an opportunity of meeting him. So then, some years went by, and in 1946, Meher Baba came from Lahore and came to Dehradun. And do you want to sit back?
I'm fine, Nosh.
Nice. Okay.
Thank you.
So, in 1946, Meher Baba came to Dehradun, and my parents invited him for lunch. So he came with 4 or 5 of his mandli, and this was at 36 Little Road. And when you read Meher Baba literature, you will see that this 36 Little Road doesn't exist anymore. They've made a hotel over there where our house used to be, in Dehradun. Dehradun, I mean, I guess most of you know, but it's in the foothills of the Himalayas, 150 miles from Delhi. So when when he came to our house, I was 2 months old, and Baba took me in his arms, and moved around from room to room, sat with me. And my mother, who also met him for the first time, was very touched by Baba's care and loving attention to her little son. And she was extremely attracted to Baba. But as far as I was concerned, Meher Baba was sowing the seed of love for him in my heart. And that was the beginning of my journey with Meher Baba.
Question from the audience. Anyone want to ask a question? Yeah. Tell us something about the mandate.
Okay, so now Meher Baba came in 1950 during the New Life, and he spent quite some time, and then he lived in a place called Majri Mafi, which later on became Meher Mafi, which was about 4 miles away from 36 Lytton Road. And the Mandli stayed there, and Meher Baba also stayed there. Going from there to Haridwar and Rishikesh and Motichur, these are various different places where he contacted the Masts. But then he moved across the road from us. So we were in 36 Lytton Road, he was in 39 Lytton Road, and that was across the road from us. And the interesting thing is that since I was a little boy at that time, we had the opportunity of going in and out of the house, and I came closer and closer. And then Meher Baba came in 1953 to spend an entire year in Dehradun. But he stayed a little distance away from where we live. It was 109 Rajpur Road, which is on the way to Missouri. So there was a huge darshan program, and he had been in seclusion for a very long time, and he gave a very large darshan program. The interesting thing about that day when he gave darshan was September 7, 1953, and that was the day he gave one of the most important discourses of his ministry, which was the highest of the high. Now, even though Jimmy has not asked me this question, I'd like to talk a little bit about Meher Baba gave discourses at various times in his ministry. But it's very important for all of you to know is that every discourse that he gave was prompted by an incident. It was not always at random that Meher Baba, he may make comments from time to time, but never a complete discourse. Like the highest of the high discourse was given, and there's a background to it. As I mentioned to you, Meher Baba was in Dehradun in 1953, and he used to live at 109 Rajpur Road. But there was a hut that had been constructed across the road from there. So Baba would walk through a little field, and he would cross the road and go and sit in seclusion in this hill. And Aloba, or one of the Mandli, would hold an umbrella over him, and he would walk across and go for seclusion in that hill, into that hut. One day what happened is, as he was going past, a car suddenly came and blocked his pathway. And a man and a woman jumped out of the car. And the man obviously had met Meher Baba several times in the past. And the woman, his wife, who also jumped out of the car, was completely mad, completely crazy. And she was flailing her hands, tossing her hair around, and moving her body. She was obviously a mad woman. So he fell at Baba's feet and said, Baba, bless me. Baba, bless me. And Baba said, I'm in a very important work at this time. Don't ask me for my blessings. So he says, oh Baba, but you know, I love you so much. Cure my wife of this ailment and bless me and bless my wife. Baba said, I'm again repeating to you, don't ask me for my blessings at this very critical moment of my seclusion. No, Baba, but I can't leave this place without your blessing. You've got to bless me, and I'm an old lover of yours, and so on and so forth. He went on and on and on, and Baba would repeatedly plead with him not to ask for his blessings, but he would not listen. Finally, Baba said, okay, I'll bless you. And Baba did this, and he left. Of course, his wife was cured. He went into business, did exceedingly well, but he never saw Meher Baba again. So the upshot of this was that Baba gave this discourse on the highest of the high, as to who do we take me to him to be, who do we take me to be. He says, I'm not a Mahatma, I'm not a Mahapurush. I'm the highest of the high and I'm the lowest of the low. So this is a very significant discourse by Meher Baba. Another example again I'm digressing, is that okay? I'm digressing here and there, was when Mahatma Gandhi opposed Meher Baba on the issue of violence and non-violence, and wrote a rather nasty letter to Meher Baba about that subject. And so you notice that in the discourses there are two chapters on violence and non-violence. One is the chapter that he dictated and it was sent to Gandhi, and the second one was an explanation based on the points that Gandhi raised at that time to make him understand further, and then he of course understood and responded. So every time Baba gave a discourse, it was prompted by an event. So okay, so then what happened is when Baba left Dehradun in 1953, November 1953, I had by then become extremely attached to him and very, very close to him. I didn't take it very kindly, and I tried to renounce myself, and so that's a different story by itself. How I wanted to renounce everything, my studies, my parents, and then go and live with Meher Baba.
How old were you that time?
Beg pardon?
How old were you?
I was 18 years old. Yeah. So then what happened is that I was in a must-like state for a period of time, and then Baba put a stop to all that by sending me a number of messages, a number of orders, and during that period, I happened to see a small news item in the Hindustan Times, which said that they were planning to hold the Third World Religions Conference in New Delhi. And people from all over the world were invited, people of all faiths. The Pope sent his representative, the High Priest of the Zoroastrians was there. So, I mean, everybody representing every branch of religion. Then there were Mahatmas, yogis. It was organized by, some of you may have heard his name, Sant Kirpal Singh, and Muni Sushil Kumar were the organizers of this conference. And the secretary was a man called Baron Frary von Blomberg, who was a follower of Sant Kirpal Singh. So I asked the registration fee was 100 rupees. I asked my father if he would put that money up to register me. He says, I'll be happy to put it up, but you'll have to ask Meher Baba. See, in our life, because we were so close to Meher Baba and very much like family, every step we asked him questions. Should we do this? Should we do that? Whether it was my job, or whether it was the glow, or whether anything it was, it was always to ask him before we went ahead and did anything. So a letter was sent. I wrote to Baba asking him if I could attend the Third World Religions Conference, and he agreed that. My parents wanted some kind of a distraction for me because I was in that state, and Baba probably understood and gave me immediate approval and wanted to focus my energies on something a lot more constructive than just having to renounce everything. So, because I was by that time I was 19. So just because I was a teenager, I didn't want the organizers to know that I was a teenager. So they sent me the registration papers, and they had given several slots and you had to select a slot. I selected World Peace. So, and then I sent a subject. The subject was the supervening powers of world peace and the evolution of the supervening powers of faith in the evolution of world peace, which probably didn't mean anything significant, but I sent it to him so that it would be a little impressive and so forth. So I went there, and I went to Delhi, mugged up a 45-minute speech. They'd given me 45 minutes. When I landed there, the organizers were a little astonished that I was a teenager, and as it turned out, I was the youngest delegate at the Third World Religions Conference. So we landed there, and what do I discover? That you might want to come and sit in front.